Aetherdrift is a celebration of vehicles, featuring the highest concentration of the subtype in the game's history. But despite vehicles being so ubiquitous both in the real world and in fantasy, it took Magic a surprisingly long time to nail down their designs. Looking back, it's clear that vehicles had been lurking within the game's design space for years, even if they weren't always explicitly labeled as such. Magic has long experimented with the idea of piloted war machines, from early artifacts that transported creatures, to mechanics requiring creature sacrifices, to creatures that functioned as vehicles. Vehicles, at least in terms of flavor, have been present in Magic since the game's inception. However, at this time, there was no unified philosophy on how to represent vehicles in-game. Each designer approached them from a different angle, leading to a variety of mechanical interpretations. The first example appeared in Alpha, with Pirate Ship, which takes the form of a creature card. Its damage-dealing ability was meant to represent the ship's cannons. While you can see what Richard Garfield was going for here, this design is still pretty clunky. Shortly after, Flying Carpet made its debut in Arabian Nights, showcasing another approach to vehicles in Magic. Unlike Pirate Ship, this card was a non-creature artifact, emphasizing the direct relationship between the object and the creature using it. An interesting restriction on the card was that only one creature could use it per turn, since it had to be tapped, reinforcing the idea that only a single rider could board it at a time. We see something similar in Mirage with Chariot of the Sun, a fun riff on the myth of Icarus. With Tempest, Magic introduced Telethopter, which took the relationship between creatures and vehicles in an entirely new direction. Up until this point, interactions between creatures and vehicles had been one-sided. The vehicle provided a benefit to the creature, but the creature didn't actively impact the vehicle itself. Telethopter changed that dynamic. As an artifact creature, Telethopter could function independently, but if a player tapped a creature, it gained flying. This mechanic implied that a pilot was necessary to operate the machine, marking the first time Magic introduced a vehicle that worked better if a creature interacted with it. Next up is Predator Flagship from Nemesis, the first legendary card to represent a vehicle. This flying warship, central to the Weatherlight saga, has two activated abilities. The first gives a creature flying, representing them coming aboard the ship, while the second destroys a creature with flying, capturing the ship's fearsome laser weapons. Predator Flagship signaled a shift toward more nuanced vehicle designs, where the mechanics reflected not just the concept of transport, but also the identity of the ship itself. Things got better with Prophecy, which introduced two artifact creatures that bore a strong resemblance to modern crude cards, Hollow Warrior and Kulden Battle Wagon. Hollow Warrior played like a vehicle with Crew 1, in that it could only function if another creature tapped. Meanwhile, Kulden Battle Wagon took things even further. Instead of persisting like today's vehicles, it was a one-use battering ram that destroyed itself after a single attack. In this regard, it built upon the Telethopter approach. These concepts were solid steps toward defining what vehicles could be. So too were the mechanics of cards like Kaldoran Dead and Spined Fluke. Though they don't look anything like Renegade Freighter, they share a key design element with vehicles. Both are heavily undercosted creatures that require sacrificing another creature to function. While this is a more extreme version than crewing a vehicle, both mechanics require a secondary investment of creatures to work properly. A similar idea appeared in the Lorwyn block with champion creatures. Although their flavor had nothing to do with vehicles, they also required you to forego the use of one creature to strengthen another. Vehicle-type cards resurfaced in various sets with mixed results. Soratami Cloud Chariot from Saviors of Kamigawa followed the Flying Carpet approach. Then there's Gruul Warplow from Guild Pact, which blended multiple approaches. It grants other creatures trample as a passive, but could also be transformed into a creature itself. Meanwhile, Warmonger's Chariot was a vehicle in equipment form, as was Chariot of Victory, At this point, it was clear that the game's designers were still searching for a definitive solution. Vehicles had been represented in numerous ways over the years, but no singular approach had become the standard. That was about to change. The turning point was Kaladesh. The big shift that occurred with this set was the realization that vehicles needed a universal, intuitive mechanic to make them work. Plus, this steampunk-inspired world, filled with inventive machines and a thriving culture of artifice, was the perfect environment to formally introduce the vehicle subtype. Indeed, R&D got the idea for adding vehicles to the set when they saw a flying ship in the concept art. The designers drew inspiration from the telethopter approach, where a vehicle became more functional when piloted by creatures. This led to the introduction of vehicles as non-creature artifacts that could transform into artifact creatures when crewed. The mechanic originally used the keyword board, requiring a certain number of creatures to tap in order to activate a vehicle. The player also had to pay a mana cost in addition to this. While a creature was aboard, the vehicle would grant it special effects. For instance, a hot air balloon might bestow flying on any creatures inside. However, playtesting revealed that this approach had a number of problems, including overly encouraging token-heavy strategies. The solution was to make it so that tapping creatures would buff the effects of the vehicle rather than the creature, and to shift the requirement from a number of creatures to total power. The revised mechanic was renamed Crew, and it became the defining trait of the new vehicle subtype. One cool part of this change is that it places the focus on the driver. The pilot enhances the vehicle, not the other way around. At first glance, these vehicles might seem like they belong in the same category as equipment. Both are artifact types that require creatures to function. However, while they share that basic dependency, the way they interact with creatures is fundamentally different. In fact, the more you analyze their mechanics, the more apparent it becomes that vehicles play more like creatures with built-in drawbacks than they do like equipment. But vehicles come with pluses too. One of their strengths is that their crew requirements let you make use of creatures that otherwise wouldn't contribute to combat. This could be a summoning sick creature, a utility creature you weren't planning to attack with, or something with a defensive role that's temporarily unnecessary. Vehicles were an instant success. Smuggler's Copter, Sky Sovereign, and Cultivator's Caravan became some of the most popular and impactful cards in Kaladesh. After Kaladesh, vehicles became deciduous, meaning that while they were not evergreen, i.e. appearing in every set, they could be used whenever a set naturally called for them. The next few years saw only a handful of vehicles released, but several brought fresh mechanical experimentation. Enchanted Carriage from Throne of Eldraine introduced a new concept: vehicles that created their own crew when they entered the battlefield. This ensured that the vehicle wouldn't be stranded without creatures to pilot it. It's also a flavor win, referencing Cinderella. Meanwhile, some vehicles also beautifully showed off elements of the world they existed on, demonstrating the subtype's potential for conveying flavor. For example, the gorgeous art and flavor text of Funeral Longboat provide an insight into Kaldheim cultures and the way they deal with death, while Colossal Plow is a nice snapshot of life on a Kaldheim farm, complemented nicely by Giant Ox. Another flavor win is Grond the Gatebreaker, appearing in the Lord of the Rings set, which is a creature while you control an army. Then there's the heavy metal awesomeness of the vehicles in the Warhammer set, like Knight Paladin and Reaver Titan. Some vehicles also broke through with their power level. For instance, War of the Spark gave us Parhelion 2, an 8-mana white 5/5 with flying, first strike, vigilance, and crew 4. It's an absolute game ender when it swings, creating 2 4/4 angel tokens that come into play already attacking. While its mana cost is steep, Parhelion 2 pairs exceptionally well with Greasefang Okiba Boss, making it a menace in Pioneer. There's also Essica's Chariot, one of the most beloved green vehicles. It's a 4-mana 4/4 with crew 4 that brings along 2 2/2 cat tokens when it enters, but the real power comes from its attack ability. It can create a token copy of any token you control, which can snowball quickly in token-heavy strategies. The cyberpunk setting of Kamigawa Neon Dynasty brought vehicles back into the spotlight in a big way. Since mechs, hovercrafts, and robotic transport fit seamlessly into the high-tech world of Kamigawa, vehicles became a major design focus in the set. Mech Titan Core offered a dramatic new effect, assembling a giant mech by exiling multiple artifact creatures, which paid homage to classic mecha anime. Then there's Reckoner Bankbuster, which proved to be strong in both Standard and Pioneer, and High Speed Hoverbike, which was the first vehicle with Flash, and it enabled combat trickery by tapping a creature when it entered. Immediately following Neon Dynasty, Streets of New Capenna continued experimenting with vehicles, fitting them into its Prohibition-era crime world. These designs were situational but impactful. Getaway Car's effect suits its name well, returning creatures to their owner's hand, and Capenna Express got more creative with its alternate animation cost, representing the player purchasing a train ticket. This brings us to Aetherdrift, which embraces vehicles more than any set before it. The modern philosophy for vehicle design focuses on flavorful effects, niche applications, and alternative utility. For this reason, many vehicles in Aetherdrift have secondary purposes beyond just attacking, ensuring that they remain relevant even when you can't crew them. Some have ETB effects or activated abilities, static abilities or alternate activation costs, or even cycling, so you can get rid of them if you don't have enough creatures, or if you already have too many vehicles. Rover Blades even gets cheekily creative by being a vehicle and an equipment at the same time. Two of the most interesting are Cryptcaller Chariot and The Last Ride. Cryptcaller Chariot is a 4-mana black 5/5 with Menace and Crew 2. Whenever you discard one or more cards, it creates a 2/2 zombie token equal to the number of cards discarded. In certain decks, you don't even need to crew this vehicle for it to be incredibly strong. Then there's The Last Ride. At first glance, The Last Ride is a terrifying 1-mana black 13/13 with Crew 2. But there's a catch. Its power and toughness are reduced by your life total. This makes it reminiscent of Death's Shadow, a card that infamously turned low life totals into an advantage. Additionally, The Last Ride allows you to pay 3 mana and 2 life to draw a card, letting you control its strength while generating card advantage. Hot Wheels jokes aside, Aetherdrift demonstrates that vehicles have become an integral part of Magic's storytelling and gameplay. From pirate ships to time machines, battle mechs to mobster getaway cars. After years of experimentation, refinement, and mechanical evolution, the game now has a robust framework for making vehicles. They're an elegant solution to a surprisingly complex design problem. Until next time, thanks for watching.